This is Studio 809.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Outdoors Hiking Bob podcast. I am your host, Hiking Bob Falcone, and you can find me on my website at hikingbob.com, which has links to my social media accounts, my columns at the, what's it called now, 6035media.org. Used to be the Colorado Springs Independent. Also, all the other podcasts we've done, my photography website. Also, if you'd like to support this podcast, I encourage you to do that at Patreon, patreon.com/hikingbob. And we've opened up some new price points there for supporters. If you just want to help contribute a little bit, you can do that. Anyway, all that stuff is there. All that you can find on my website at hikingbob.com. A quick note, as a little bit of clarification from last week's podcast, based on information I was provided by Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and this is when we were discussing the value of volunteerism, I quoted a value of the minimum wage at $15 an hour. Now, some of you who are maybe making minimum wage are probably saying, I'm not getting that much. They clarified that with me, that is the minimum wage for state of Colorado public employees, so not for the general public. So the number was valid, but it wasn't in the right context. So I just want to make that clear that the $15 an hour minimum wage was for state of Colorado public employees. And with that, we'll just continue on. Today, my guest is Britt Haley, who was the I don't want to say new because I don't think new is quite the word for it yet, but the current, most recent head of the Colorado Springs Park Recreation and Cultural Services Department.
Hello.
Hi. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
You came here from being the head of the TOPS program and also planning and development, if I have that correct.
Yes, so we call it design and development because we do a lot of capital projects, park renovations, any of the trail work that you see is done by that team, but we also have the Trails, Open Space, and Parks program within that group as well, and I got to be the manager for that wonderful program too. Great.
And you filled in for Karen Paulus, who resigned during the year, and you filled in as the interim, and then you got promoted to the permanent position there. So happy to see you in that position, although I know you're juggling because you're still doing the TOPS thing. So I know that you're juggling quite a bit.
Yes, many of us do several jobs here at the department, and we'll be looking to fill that other job soon.
I don't think anybody in this department that I'm aware of does one thing.
No, of course not. And that's what makes it exciting.
Yeah, I think everybody does multiple things. I'm not sure how everybody can juggle all these different things, but somehow you all manage to do it. So anyway, I'm glad to have you here. I know you're super busy, so thank you for taking the time to talk to us. But we've carrying on a tradition we've done over the last several years, which is kind of talk to the heads of the parks departments. We're going to be talking to the head of the El Paso County Parks Department next week about what the previous year was like and kind of get an idea of what's coming up for the current year. So with that, I'll ask you a very open-ended question. What were in your view, were the big accomplishments of the Colorado Springs Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Services Department in 2022?
Well, I'd like to focus on four things, one of which I'm very proud of, and it's in terms of leadership and outdoor stewardship. The City of Colorado Springs Park System was the first in the country to get Leave No Trace gold standard site designation. So I will talk about that a little bit more because it's an achievement, but that's one I can think of. Kind of along the lines of that, the Trails, Open Space, and Parks program celebrated 25 years in existence last year, and I think that was a wonderful accomplishment to look back and to see what has been able to be done for our community in the Pikes Peak region with the TOPS program. We also were able to open Panorama Park, which is a park project that many people have been following. And so it was really exciting to cut that ribbon and watch children play in the park that we had been envisioning all that time. And then finally, we also made some pretty nice upgrades to the Acacia Park playground downtown Colorado Springs. Cool. So those are four that I can think of right off the bat.
Awesome. So let's talk about the Leave No Trace thing. That's correct me if I'm wrong, the first park system to get that designation. Is that correct? I mean, individual parks have gotten it, but we're the first system to get it.
That's right. And we're also the first municipal parks to get it. And what we did, and most of the time you have You submit your application, and it's like a single state park. And we do have a couple of state parks in Colorado that have achieved this status. But our staff decided to go big, and we actually submitted 16 different sites for inclusion in our application. And so the Leave No Trace team, which is centered in Colorado, but is a national organization that travels all over evaluating stewardship and these practices, they came down and they scored us on 16 different sites.
And not a one of them failed, so we got the entire system.
That's right, and there are 7 principles of Leave No Trace status, and there's a lot of training and public outreach and education. And what the idea is that when you're folks that come out and enjoy your sites understand all of these best practices, not only are they better prepared to enjoy those spaces, but they also take better care of them, and then they also educate other potential park users about how to do that really well. So I'm very, very proud of the team because it was such an ambitious undertaking. And I can say that all of our volunteer groups and our friends of various open spaces all took Leave No Trace training. They all pitched in to make this a successful initiative. And at the end of the day, we have this gold standard site designation. And we're the only ones really in our category that have shown those values and have received that recognition. Very proud.
So go big or go home, right?
We went really big.
That's pretty awesome. And I know I was a tiny little piece of that because I took the Leave No Trace trainer training. I'm trying to make that sound right, which was offered to me, and it was good for me to have that because now I can help spread the word a little bit and drop that in the various social media stuff and things that I do and make that a little more, a little more effective, I guess, of a message. But I'm glad that was part of the outreach, was training more people to train other people in that. So I think that was pretty cool.
Sure, it builds on itself. And
sure.
We also upgraded our trailhead kiosks and our signs and our websites and all of the information that we provide with these principles. So we are spreading that good message as well.
Cool. That's going to be a hard second act to follow. I'm not sure how you follow that up with what your second act is.
Well, we'll find something, but I can tell you that other park systems in the state have reached out to our folks to find out how they can follow through and look to do that. And I know that we're working with some federal partners as well. So
cool.
We are continuing that mission, and I'm just so thrilled that we started it last year.
That's awesome. I think that's pretty cool.
The follow-on to that is, of course, celebrating the TOPS program's 25th anniversary. And we did, throughout the entire year, focus on those attributes of that program that have been so successful. So we started out the year with social media and a big communications plan. We had a celebration mid-year. We actually have a calendar competition every year for this Parks Department, and this time around we focused on TOPS properties. And so this year's calendar is just beautiful because it's really focused on some of those spaces that were made possible by a program that was originally initiated by citizens. It wasn't a government program. It was citizens who said, what we need to do is we need a designated fund so that we can have parks and trails and open spaces in our city. And they were successful in 1997 with that ballot initiative. And now that's produced over 7,000 acres of open space that people enjoy. In fact, we are described in the city of Colorado Springs as having folks that are ultra users of those spaces, meaning they are out there 5-6 times a week, maybe more.
Right.
A lot of people use those for athletic training and sports training and really have the opportunity to be outdoors no matter where they are. It's also improved or built 67 parks. Panorama Park was one of those. And then 53 miles of trail across the city. And of course, we love our trails in the city of Colorado Springs.
So give people just a really brief history of some of the places they may visit that would not be available to them if it wasn't for the TOPS program.
One that a lot of people enjoy, and it's right outside our door, is the Cheyenne Mountain State Park. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people don't realize that when that park was originally opened, about half of the land acquisition was made possible because of the TOPS program. And if you've ever been to Cheyenne Mountain State Park, you know how beautiful it is. And just think if that had been developed into a housing development or something similar. Another good example is the Red Rock Canyon open space. That was a property that the owners really thought maybe we could make that into a resort community and a conference center and a golf course. Luckily, though, the TOPS program was able to ultimately purchase it with a lot of support from volunteers and our local Friends of Red Rock Canyon Open Space. This was a Great Outdoors Colorado initiative, so we were able to purchase this property, and now people really enjoy so many opportunities in that property that otherwise wouldn't be available. Blodgett Open Space, if you go even further to the north on the Western Mountain backdrop, that was made possible by the TOPS program. And a lot of people think of Blodgett Peak, which is right behind that open space, next to the Academy, and then next to the U.S. Forest Service. So you end up with a lot of capacity for those unfragmented open areas to be preserved. On the south and the east side, we have Blue Stem Prairie Open Space. And that's another one that if you go out there now, you will notice development is coming along every edge of that property. Sure. So wildlife opportunities have been preserved because of these. So there's just a lot of, it's nice to be in a city that has kind of unique attributes to it. We have the state park, we have Garden of the Gods and Red Rock Canyon, we have Blodgett, and then we have these prairie properties that I failed to mention Corral Bluffs. And Corral Bluffs is, of course, a fascinating property that we are working on today.
And that was kind of one that when that was purchased, we didn't know what was out there. I mean, we knew the land, obviously, but the hidden gems that are in there that are so significant, that came as a surprise later on.
We did not know the significance, but now we do, and I think that is the only site that is known of on the world right. that has entire fossils of the first mammals to emerge after the die-off of the dinosaurs. I mean, it's truly phenomenal.
Right. And how close we came to not finding that. It would have been, plowed under or whatever, or just nobody would have been out there to see it if we hadn't.
Well, as I recall, there was an interest in making that a motorbike park.
Yep.
And you can think to yourself what the motorbike trails would have done to these priceless fossils. So definitely it was a big save.
Right. Very cool. And we'll just touch on this briefly. That program is running out in 2025. There's going to be an election coming up this year to extend it for another 20 years.
Sure. So in Colorado, we always like to see a sunset on any tax program. And in the city of Colorado Springs, taxpayers in the past have extended the TOPS program, but it's currently scheduled to expire December 31st of 2025. And the city council just voted earlier this year to place a question on the ballot asking voters whether they wanted to extend that program for another 20 years to 2045.
Well, you mentioned the wildlife at Blue Stem Prairie, and I'm thinking about two things that are out there. One is a fair amount of pronghorn antelope that are out there, and then the other one is the rattlesnakes, which I've encountered. I've encountered both of them out there. It's a beautiful piece of land, and it's I think it's best suited for cyclists, and I think the cyclists like going out there because it's pretty big, and it's wide open. So in like this time of the year in the winter, it's a warmer place to be because there's not a lot of shade, but you get some good sun on there. And if you don't want to be in the shade where things are colder, Blue Stem Prairie is kind of a cool place. And then the reservoir, of course, which is not ours, but that's privately owned, kind of breaks it up a little bit and gives you some, something a little different out there.
What I think is neat about Blue Stem is that when some of our other trails are muddy and wet, Blue Stem is often dry and available. So that's kind of nice. And early in the year, if you're training and you feel like you're just not quite in shape to go do the Manitou Incline, well, you can actually go out to Bluestem Prairie and have a really nice time. And the other thing that's interesting about Bluestem Prairie, in addition to the antelope, is that because of the water source there, you can get some pretty interesting bird species. Right. And because of that symbiosis with the rattlesnakes, we have burrowing owls. Yep. And if you've ever seen a picture of a burrowing owl, it's just the cutest thing that ever was photographed. They've got these long legs and big eyes, and that's pretty much what they are. And
if I remember, one of them actually one of those pictures made it into the calendar this year.
That's correct.
Right.
Yeah. In fact, it's this month's picture, and it's cute as can be.
It is. They look like they're just going to topple over or something. They're pretty funny to watch. Pretty neat. So we have the Leave No Trace. We have the anniversary of the TOPS program. We're pretty big thing. Like I said, pretty big program. It, gathers up millions of dollars a year. So what's the other topic you had? Panorama Park.
Yes. So we were able to open Panorama Park after really a few years of working with the community and making sure we understood what they wanted. What we had was a really phenomenal park on the north side of the city called John Venezia Community Park, and it had a spray ground, which is a playground with water features, spraying water all over, and you kids go nuts for that, and I think adults do too.
They won't admit it, but they like it.
They have sports fields. They have a universally accessible playground, which means that any person of any physical ability can go into that playground and enjoy it, whether you're the caretaker or you're the participant. But the south part of our city, and particularly the southeast, did not have a park of that level of really features. So we looked at different park sites across the southeast with the Trust for Public Land as an initiative in their Parks for People program to find out, could we choose a space and provide those kinds of amenities. And Panorama Park ultimately was chosen. It was a very large site for a neighborhood park at 13.5 acres. So we began this community conversation, and at first I think there was some hesitation because for our department, making a park of that level is a big commitment and, needs a lot of resources, a lot of partnerships, so much support, and everybody's got to be working together. But it started to come together. We listened to what the community wanted. We ended up getting a lot of private funding to help us get this park built. And then it went into construction, and we all eagerly awaited as each of the features really emerged out of the landscape. It was fascinating to watch this prior space, which didn't really have much going for it, turn into really a prime and premier park site for the city of Colorado Springs. So we got to open that in August of last year, and what a fun opportunity to see the community enjoy it and embrace it and be so proud of it, because they had been so involved in its design and its what features were there, that now there's a lot of ownership in that community for that park and a lot of pride.
Cool. And that was a part of town that I don't want to say by any design, but just didn't get quite the attention that it needed with park facilities and things like that. I mean, I don't think anybody intended for it that way, but somehow it just evolved that way, and it was good that we finally got back in there and, let's make a nice big park for this part of town that doesn't really have something like that.
Right. I think one of the things that was pointed out is that, the tree cover in this particular part of the city is less thick than other parts of the city. There aren't any spray grounds. There is not a universally accessible playground. The closest one is Memorial Park. So this particular site offered about an acre's worth of universally accessible play.
Very cool.
And that's just something that to be very proud of. No matter where you live in the city, come see this park and come enjoy it. And that's what happens with a park that has these kinds of features, is it really does serve the entire community. But because it's located there, that means it's within a walk for so many people that didn't have that available to them previously.
Right. One of the denser parts, one of the more densely populated parts of town too. So obviously there's a lot of people, like you said, you can get pretty close to it and get there pretty quickly. So that helps, obviously.
And it's right next to a middle school. So that means that there's a lot of collaboration with education and sports and after school activities that can happen.
Right outside their door.
Exactly.
Perfect. The other thing you had, I think, was the Acacia Park.
Yes. And so we had other projects going on that voters approved, and those we called 2B projects, which were after the number on the ballot. But it was essentially whenever there's an over collection of taxes in the city, there are two options. One is to return the money to each taxpayer, and sometimes that dollar amount isn't too significant when it's individually coming back to you. But it's really significant if it's allowed to be used for, let's say, park improvements. And that's what voters agreed to do with these 2B funds. So the Acacia Park used to have, and that's right downtown on Tejon Street in one of our historic parks, and it used to have a playground that was down in a pit, essentially. It was below grade, hard to watch your kids.
Right.
And all of the playground equipment in that particular playground site was very old and starting to be at the end of its life, perhaps getting to that point where you might feel like it was unsafe. And certainly the way that playground was designed, it just wasn't optimal for that space. So these 2B funds made it possible to really redo the playground and to bring it to a status now that is a vibrant, happy, fun place to have right downtown. And the playground structures that we were able to included those for real little kids, kind of the tot size,
cool.
And then a really, really neat climbing structure, which is circular with a lot of netting and fun things to do. So it really perked up that park, and it became a focal point for Acacia and the downtown itself. And what a fun space.
You didn't do anything with Uncle Wilbur, right? We still have that down there?
We used Uncle Wilbur as our inspiration for the design so that we could really play off that corner and then work the park going north up to that play structure, which is really a phenomenal piece. I highly recommend go play on it.
And I for those who don't know what Uncle Wilbur is, but it's this, I'm not even sure how to describe it.
It's a fountain with some musical themes.
It's a fountain that moves and musical themes, and it's at first it looks pretty bizarre, but it's actually really cool. I mean, and it's only open obviously in the summer when it's warm enough to have water running all over the place. But it's actually a pretty cool thing to sit there and watch. And when that thing starts and the music starts, everybody just gathers around it like, what is this crazy looking thing? It's really neat. It's kind of a it's a pretty unique amenity, and it's pretty cool that we have it in our park there.
Yeah, I'd say it's kind of artsy and it's musically inspired. Yep. And one of the things that I've always said is that the color schemes kind of remind me of, there was a certain kind of chewing gum called Fruit Stripes.
Okay.
And those colors have really come out. So we used all of those thematic designs to kind of work through with the new elements so that we've got that cohesive approach with the park.
Cool. The Acacia Park project was a part of, though, three other parks in downtown. So can you talk about what the other part of that 2B was? Sure.
And then prior to the 2B vote, we were engaging in this process to look at three of our historic parks, which are all within walking distance of each other, and we wanted to find the synergies for those parks to really work together. So we had Acacia Park, which has a lot of events. We have Alamo Square Park, which is the site of the Pioneers Museum, and really that place where new elected officials are sworn in on the steps of the Pioneers Museum or over at the historic gazebo. And then the third park is Antlers Park, which used to be kind of the entryway to the city from the railways. So we looked at all of those parks and what upgrades could be made, and that really informed what to ask for if we were going to do some park upgrades. And each of those parks is intended to get an upgrade. Acacia was able to get the playground.
Yeah, and Antlers Park was where they used to have the train, which is now actually back in service down on the Cumberson Toltec steam engine line down in Antonito. So it's kind of cool that train is actually back up and running and back down there.
It's come back to life.
It's come
wonderful.
back to life, and they are running it during their season down there. So it's pretty cool. And I don't know. I was down there when they first ran its inaugural run, but I haven't been down there to see it since. So I've been down there and I've seen the train a couple of times, but not when I think it's 168 was running. So
you're right. That was the name of that locomotive.
Yeah, I can't wait to see it again when it's actually running. Maybe I'll get a ride on there. I'm a member of their friends.
Time for another visit.
I'm a member of their friends group. They should allow me to go down there. So cool. So that's a lot of pretty good accomplishments. What else? I know those are the four big highlights, but do you have any other stuff that happened during the last year that you want to talk about?
Well, one thing I should probably highlight is that halfway through the year, a decision was made to move the forestry department over to Public Works. And that really didn't necessarily change anything for parks and its forestry needs, but it did help the forestry division because Public Works has massive capacity in terms of vehicles and coordinating equipment, and found a synergy in Public Works where another forestry crew could be brought forth and hired. And so I know that forestry is really on the Public Works stationery. We still consider them to be part of our, greater network of parks, recreation, and cultural services. But that change was made just to really give them a little bit more oomph. And
I remember having Dennis Will, who was the head forester when he was here, and I'm sure he has a level of significance still over at Public Works that, the constraints he had being the forestry division, but in the parks department, it was a little constrained. But yeah, you're right. Public Works seems to make a lot more sense for them, and just a greater amount of resources that department has.
Yes, especially when it comes to picking up branches from the windstorms and being able to have equipment haul it away and chip those things up. And so that's one I can think of. Another one that I do want to mention last year was we did the Phase 2 acquisition of the Fisher's Canyon open space on the west side of the city, just north of Cheyenne Mountain State Park. And we were also successful in leveraging our funds. So that was a $4 million purchase, but the Land Water Conservation Fund awarded the city of Colorado Springs a reimbursement of $1.25 million on that purchase because of all of its connectivity that it would provide through the trail system, and just recognizing what a valuable open space purchase that was. So what another accomplishment for the open space system. And
that piece of land there is a sizable chunk of the east face of Cheyenne Mountain. I mean, I would want to say the southern half of the east face, if that makes sense, is Cheyenne Mountain State Park. NORAD has a piece of that, but that's a sizable piece of the east face of Cheyenne Mountain.
It really is.
So the connectivity there is going to be pretty interesting.
Looking forward to master planning that this year. And of course, that's where the public can participate and help us identify how they would use that open space, what trails, connections they'd like to see, and to really participate in what is a beautiful, beautiful open space that, again, the owner was wanting to develop it into residential housing, actually had a development plan for over 70 homes. Mm-hmm. And the owner, to his credit, chose ultimately to sell it to the open space program, and we are grateful.
Very good. Anything else you want to talk about with last year before we move on to what's coming up this year?
No.
Okay. So let's just morph into that. Well, I don't know what order you have, but since we're talking about Fisher's Canyon and the master plan, let's talk about that for coming up this year. What's happening? What kind of timeline are we looking at for that master plan process?
Sure. So the way that it works whenever you purchase a brand new open space is that there's sometimes some work to do to make that space safe, or to do some to make sure that we understand the wildlife needs and the archaeological resources and all of those things. But as soon as we have that information, then we go into a planning process to make it available to the public. So we had 2 open spaces that had been purchased. One of them was in the prior year was the Pike View Buffer property, which is essentially at Allegheny Road and where you see the Pike View Quarry being reclaimed. Mm-hmm. In between is a really beautiful space, which we've decided to include in the Blodgett open space. So the TOPS Working Committee, which is the Citizens Advisory Committee that helps really approve budgets and make recommendations about our priorities, wanted to see forward progress on the planning for Blodgett open space, plus an implementation of project of some sort.
Right.
So they asked staff, is there any way that you could work in two of those processes, one for Blodgett and one for the Fishers Canyon
They're
project?
not asking too much or anything, right?
Right? And so we said, sure. What we could do is we'll take Blodgett first, kind of off cycle,
Right.
and we moved that through City Council and got unanimous approval to do that. And then we included the Fishers Canyon open space planning work in the budget request that we submitted to City Council with the mayor's budget for 2023. And that has been approved as well. So on our work plan for this year, a couple really big opportunities for citizens to really participate and be part of that process that makes these spaces ready for the public to go enjoy.
And I think it's important for, when we get these properties, and there's a lot of excitement when we buy these properties and people see, their tax money, this is something you're getting that, while everybody, I don't think anybody expects them to open up overnight. You've got to build, they may not have trails. You got to build trails, you got to build parking lots. You may have to put in a bathroom. A lot of things have to go into it. That's saying that steps are being taken to move those forward, I think is important for the public. They can rest assured, not only did we buy it, but we're going to try and get you in there as quick as the process allows, I guess is the best way to put it.
Well, it's like Christmas Eve. You're so excited to open your presents. And whenever there's an open space that becomes available, everyone wants to go have an adventure and
Sure.
explore and enjoy it and see how it works with everything else that they love. And one thing we know about our folks is they love our open spaces for all kinds of purposes.
And they love new ones.
New ones, you can't get enough of that really in our community. But then the other side of that coin is sometimes these places aren't quite ready
Sure.
for folks to be enjoying them. They may not be fully safe. We need to gather information and be ready. So we're trying to do that with a plan in place, and that's why we've got two of those coming forward in 2023. That we will then space according to our work plan. So we know that Blodgett is happening now, and then we'll be doing Fishers Canyon as soon as we've got some staff freed up to focus on that.
And obviously Fishers Canyon needs it because there's nothing there. There's no trails or anything through there. So obviously just can't open the doors and just say go and have fun and get lost or anything like that.
There are also some stormwater facilities that do need to be secured so that people aren't wandering into a facility unknowingly.
Sure.
So we've just got some things to do.
It takes a while.
It's like when you buy a new house. There's
Yeah.
always something to do. You're making 16 trips to Home Depot or Lowe's. Well, we're kind of doing the equivalent on the park, the parks world.
I've been in my house for 30 years. I'm still not done working on it. So I know how that goes.
You're just not ready for company yet.
Oh, it's never going to be at the rate I'm going. If I can do a project in 16 trips to Home Depot, it's a good day. So, So, kind of going back to where we're going, where is the Parks Department? What's the exciting stuff, or maybe mundane stuff? But what stuff does the Parks Department have for 2023?
Well, I've told everyone as I became the new director of the department that I have 3 initial priorities to secure, one of which is because the Trails, Open Space, and Parks sales tax will be expiring at the end of 2025, we don't want to wait too long. We've only got the one municipal election this April, and then if we're really going to squeak it out, I guess we could wait until April of 2025, but nobody wants to do that. That's way too risky.
Right.
There are other elections that might be available, but those are full of everybody else's issues, and so there's a chance you'd get lost in the fray. So definitely one of my goals was to do the policy work that it takes to get a ballot question ready, and then be prepared for that opportunity should the voters approve this highly successful program again like they did back in 2013.
Cool.
2003.
Right.
So definitely want that to be extended. And another priority that I have is, you'll probably remember back in 2020, we had a study come out of all of the parks infrastructure, really looking at, where are your maintenance needs? And what we learned was we have kind of a horrifying level of deferred maintenance in the department. And the number that came out of that study from a third-party engineering firm was $279 million worth of needs. So I feel a responsibility to start working on a plan to offer to a new administration of how to tackle some of those highest needs. And there are lots of different options that we can work on, but we're definitely working on that. And of course, tied to that is my third priority, which is preparing our department, Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Services Department, for a new mayor, because we know we're getting a new mayor.
Right.
And then for 4 new members of our city council. So it's really a transition to some new leadership and being ready to support them in their priorities or to offer opportunities and to make sure that our staff is ready and that the department is in a position to be able to be under new leadership, really.
Right. And who knows what the, we don't know who's going to get elected. So obviously there may have slightly different priorities than what we've had for the last 8 years with the current, at-large council members who are on the way out and the current mayor who's on, they're all term limited, so they have to leave. Maybe different priorities, what you've been working on for the last 8 years.
Absolutely. And the other thing is perhaps some educational opportunities. And right. It's a big department. There's a lot going on. So I think there's something for anyone, but there's also probably a big learning curve for anyone who comes in, no matter who they are. And we're here to help.
Sure. We talk about that backlog. I believe that's the Jacob study you're talking about with
that's
all
right.
those things. It would be safe to say that the issues that were fixed with the rebuilding of Panorama Park was probably a large example of what you're seeing in a lot of other parks in town, that, the equipment's been neglected and maybe it's worn out. That stuff was brand new when the park was built 30 years ago, say, and now 30 years later, standards have changed, stuff's worn out. Is that a fair assumption to say that's what a lot of these things are in that study?
A lot of it is normal wear and tear on a
Sure.
very large system. If you think about the city of Colorado Springs and the number of square miles that our city covers compared to a city like Boulder, which is pretty constrained on every side,
Sure.
there's just a lot of facilities. And they all need some kind of care. And then we also have a number of sites that were provided to be parks, which we have not yet constructed into parks and playgrounds. And so those are also awaiting attention. Those are also included in the study. Think about all of the bridges. I never gave thought to how many bridges we have across our system for pedestrians and for vehicles.
Sure.
Or if you think about all of the trails and the rehabilitation that needs to happen, it's just because our system is very, very large that we have so many needs. Panorama Park was kind of emblematic of what we had done sometimes across the city. It's almost like we did a corner of the park in terms of construction, but didn't ever really finish the entire thing.
Right. So there's a lot of that needs to be done, and that's stuff that's, correct me if I'm wrong, funded out of the general funds, the general tax funds, and city council and the mayor hash out a budget and they divide up the money. You get so much, and this department gets that much, and this department gets a little bit, and everybody divides it up. With that coming out of the general fund, and general fund support, it's been a topic on this podcast with the previous director, with Karen, and with other people about how it just hasn't caught up and haven't kept up with how big the city's gotten. We're at 500,000 people, give or take a little bit. Where do you see, or how do you see that being resolved? There's that Jacob study said there was $279 million of backlog. That is a lot of money. That is several times the entire budget for the Parks Department, I'm sure. How do you see that being resolved? How do we catch up with that? We just can't make up $279 million, just can't come up with that out of thin air. So how does that get resolved?
Well, I think the first step was a smart one in having a third party with credibility from an engineering standpoint evaluate the infrastructure.
You don't know what you don't know, right?
Sure. I mean,
Right.
we think we know, but
Right.
now we have a report that really does tell us.
Right.
I don't want to lose the information by not following up on that report. So I think what we can do in the Parks Department is put together some opportunities at various levels of funding that are within our reach to start to address it. Let's say that we wanted to identify the top 10 playgrounds that needed renovation, or the top 10 trails, and start to put together some plans for consideration. One of the things that's hard to do because everyone loves their parks and their trails and their open space so much is to prioritize. But this study really gives us a tool that we can use to do that. One of the things I've been proud of with our department is the way that we have worked hard to reduce our water usage, because that used to be one of the top costs of the entire park system. And the city general fund did help us out with our water costs by making that a centralized general cost. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be using less water. So we are putting in smart technology for irrigation, so we're not watering when it's raining, and that we are making sure that the right amount of water is going onto the parks. But we're also converting to native turf where that can be effective, and using synthetic turf where that is a better use, so that our water footprint ultimately is smaller. So I'm really proud of some of those projects. I think what I've learned from our staff is that the return on investment is over within 3 years after
Wow.
doing one of those. So some projects can really get a good return on investment right away, and that might be something that's worth looking at further across the system to make sure that we're being good stewards of these resources.
And I guess with water, like you said, it's not out of the Parks Department budget, but it's still out of the big pot of money that the Parks Department has to compete for. So obviously, even if it's not your budget, if there's less money coming out of that for that big pot of money, there's more money that's available elsewhere, I guess, if that makes any sense. But
yeah, and the other thing that I do want to acknowledge is that our elected leaders were sympathetic to our concerns and our problems and our challenges, and they worked hard to find a way to help. And that's one of the ways that they did help.
okay, so what other things do we have coming up for this year? What are the big, exciting, or like I said, or mundane things that may be coming up for the Parks Department in 23?
Well, yeah, one of the biggest things is really preparing for a new mayor and that leadership. And so, but we're also carrying on a lot of the projects that we already had in the works. And so our 2023 budget, we will be pursuing a nice playground renovation on the west side of the city. We will be pursuing in the TOPS program some exciting acquisitions that really weren't available to us last year, and we had a breakthrough on the negotiations. And so you can watch City Council for probably one of the biggest open space acquisitions that has happened recently.
And that'll be the Wild Horse Ranch that I mentioned at my column last week at the 6035 that's coming up. That's like 1,000 acres of land out there.
Yeah, so imagine a ranch that's over 1,000 acres large, and that's something that we were able to get under contract because we have a partner in the Conservation Fund. The Conservation Fund knew the family that was willing to sell the ranch and ultimately was able to work with us to get that under contract, but it is contingent on all of the approvals at City Council level in order to do that, and at Parks Board.
Okay, great. The other thing coming up that we've been seeing a lot of talk about is the Coleman Park, which is out on the west side. I'm sorry, the east side, and it surrounds a place near and dear to my heart, which is now the Vibes Baseball Park, formerly the Sky Sox Baseball Park. We're near, we've been season ticket holders there for almost since we moved here, so it's near and dear to my heart. And it's been basically kind of a wasteland out there. But that's the new Coleman Park. Where are we at with the master plan on that and development of that park?
So Coleman Park is another one of those sites that was designated to be one of the larger community parks. It has all of the kinds of features that you would drive to because it's so large and has those features like ball fields. And if your kid's playing soccer and they're in tournaments, and you'd be driving out to these kinds of parks. Or if you're interested in the universally accessible playground or those kinds of features. So Coleman has long languished, waiting for its time to be developed into that park site. We were able to do a land exchange a couple of years ago in order to increase that site's size, and it's now over 70 acres of parkland. And because of the 2B vote, one of the projects on that list, you kind of think of like PPRTA has a list, which is the Pikes Peak Rural Transportation Authority. Well, this is kind of the parks version, was the voter approved funds to do various projects. And this project was just the public planning process to identify what that site could do and what features the community is seeking for that site. We just finished the final public meeting for our planning process. And the site's pretty unique because it does wrap around that Vibe Stadium that you were talking about. It has the the Reagan soccer field there where the Switchbacks had been previously playing. They put a lot of improvements into the site. It looks very professional from a soccer standpoint. And they left that for the Parks Department as part of our agreement when they moved downtown to Widener Field. But so we've got those features that are already built out. And then the site itself has Sand Creek running right through the center of it, which is a fabulous thing from the idea of having kind of that corridor and seeing the wetlands and the wildlife, but it's a very difficult thing for site planning. There's a lot of topography, there are a lot of other things. So working with the site to identify what can go where and what our community is looking for on the east side of the city, that was nice to see that plan come together and show what it could be when it grows up.
So when I said it was a wasteland, it's because there was a lot of erosion and stuff from Sand Creek rolling through there. But you could see the potential there because behind that was the golf course, which I guess now we have part of that golf course. Is that correct?
That's right.
So moving around of some land back there.
Used to be the Springs Ranch Golf Course, and a portion of that, about 23.5 acres, was able to be added to the Coleman Park site so that we had a couple of new things to work with and maybe a little bit more flexibility.
It seems like some connectivity back toward the south there, too, that connects up to that neighborhood out back there.
Yes, and over to Peterson Road, which is kind of nice to have another entrance.
Cool. So the 2B money paid for the development part of it.
For the planning.
For the planning part of it. I'm sorry. I was getting ahead of myself there. So the next question, of course, is what's the status, now that that's been, I guess, completed, where's the status of moving forward development?
So what I told the community last week at our final meeting was there's some ground truthing that we really need to do with the planning. What we learned when you do core samples is sometimes the thing that you want to put on the park may not exactly work there. So we're working on that a little bit. And then I want to put together a funding plan to offer to new leadership to see if this is the approach they want to take. Do we need to modify our park plan? Where, if it does need to be modified, we'll take it back out to the public and get comment again.
Okay. And I'm sure that, 70 acres of land, master planning with a lot of stuff, the development of that's going to cost I'm going to say small fortune, actually a rather large fortune, I'm sure, to develop 1,000 acres. And that's parkland as opposed to like the Wild Horse Ranch that we're looking at on the east side of town. That's going to be open space. So tell us what the difference is between the amenities people can expect from a park and an open space.
Oh, gosh, I'm really glad you asked that question. When I think of a park, whether it's the big community park or your local neighborhood park, that is the built environment. That's part of your cityscape. It has irrigation and turf typically and pavilions for picnicking and a little bit of parking for a neighborhood park, a lot of parking for a community park. So you're seeing really that built environment with a lot of amenities. And that's why it's a very expensive endeavor. John Venezia Community Park was $13.2 million to build, and that was 28 acres of park space. The recent renovation of the 13.5-acre Panorama Park was $8.5 million. So it gets pretty pricey pretty quick. Open spaces don't have to be irrigated, manicured, mowed. They have the kinds of facilities for people who like to do passive recreational use. And in fact, the TOPS ordinance prohibits some of those more built items. So you can't build a playground in a TOPS open space. That's actually prohibited. So that means that people enjoy them in their natural state. And that also means that the cost to take care of them is a lot less per acre than it is with let's say, a sports field, whether it's synthetic turf or it's bluegrass. It needs continuous care.
Right.
And you don't do that with an open space.
So to make this difference even more obvious, Coleman Park is going to have a bazillion amenities, I'm sure. It's going to have a field. It's going to have, like you said, playgrounds. It's going to have manicured lawns. It's going to have a lot of things. Where when you look at an open space like Wild Horse Ranch, I'm envisioning it's going to have a parking lot with a sign and maybe a bathroom.
Yeah, maybe not even
trails.
a restroom. Right?
And maybe, and some trails.
But definitely looping trails, wildlife
Sure.
opportunities. It's just a really different experience when you come out to your open space. You won't have the baseball game going on with a concessionaire. You won't have 20 pickleball courts, which is what we're aiming for at the Coleman Park. So it's just a really different environment.
Cool. And I think it's important for people to understand the difference of, what they're expecting at. You're not going to go out to Wild Horse Ranch and have a football game or something like that, but you may have a baseball game at Coleman Field or something.
Sure, and just kind of give you a sense, we looked at maintenance costs for a typical park, a neighborhood park, and that's about $14,000 a year just for water and your mowing and picking up the trash and repairs. For an open space, that's $14,000 per acre.
Right.
But an open space is something close to $150 per acre, so it's a little different. And that's
probably the acre around the parking lot.
Yeah, definitely the places that are most highly used.
Yeah, I'm sure. So cool. So we got a couple things going on. The Coleman Park thing sounds like it's going to be pretty exciting, following on the heels of Panorama Park and following on the heels of Venezia Park. Obviously, a lot of work still has to be done. These things don't happen overnight, but with a master plan, people can see that there's a means to an end there, that there's a plan now. We just have to move forward with it.
It's a definite step forward, and
Right.
it's a necessary part of that process.
Sure, you just can't build stuff willy-nilly out there. You got to kind of some kind of plan or blueprint to work with.
No, but I guess I would argue that the east side of our city deserves a facility
Sure.
that's close by, and so that's the charm of Coleman Park is.
Right.
It's needed by the community.
Yeah, what I'm saying is you can't build these things without going through the whole master plan process, so you know what people want and where you're going to put it, and have an idea what things are going to cost. And have some kind of plan going forward.
Yes, you
Cool.
can't shoot from the hip.
No, none of the stuff. We're playing with a lot of people's money, and we want to make sure we do it right. I'm sure.
Well, and, just to give you a sense of it, for Panorama Park, we had so many different sources of money all coming together. To make that park happen at $8.5 million, and Coleman will be no different.
Right. I've talked about in the past about Castle Rock's Philip Miller Park, and I'm sure you're familiar with it. And it was a $30 million park. I mean, you're talking about bigger than the budget of most parks departments, and they built. But it was a lot of money from a lot of different places, and they have a little more flexibility. They have concessionaires in there who are paying fees to operate in there, for specific things. The park's still free, but that was a good example. And I wrote about it, some years ago when they opened, about how they were able to money from this foundation and that foundation and GoCo and everybody else, and we're able to build a $30 million city park, not even a county park. It's a city park, and it was big and huge and expensive, and it's beautiful, and it's a good blueprint. I think that idea of stuff, and maybe even some public-private partnerships to be able to pay for these things.
Sure, and it all starts with a plan.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, you can't. I'm a believer that as much as these things are a public amenity and essential for the quality of life in a town, that you can't always rely strictly on tax money to make these things happen. There's only so much of that to go around anyway.
I think it makes a stronger project, honestly, if you've got a lot of buy-in from different resources.
Sure. Everybody's got a stake in the thing. They want to make it look successful.
Theirs.
Yeah, absolutely. So what else we got? What else is coming up there for the next year, for this year? We're already in February.
Well, it is funny because we've just begun our 2023 budget, but we're already starting to work on our 2024 budget.
Oh, boy.
Because that's just how that cycle works.
Okay.
So we've got, the trail projects that I can think of really are the Chamberlain Trail.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of work going on for that. Perhaps some acquisition that would make that possible, and definitely the planning across the Fishers Canyon open space involves the Chamberlain Trail. So Chamberlain Trail is envisioned to essentially be a trail that could go along the west side of the city all the way from Cheyenne Mountain State Park to Blodgett or the Air Force Academy. So think about how fun that would be to just be able to get on a trail and go as far as you wanted to go.
That's pretty cool.
So
that's pretty nice.
Yeah.
So those things are moving forward. One of the issues that we hear people talk about is I still think we live in a fairly safe city. I think we live in a pretty safe city, actually. But people are a little concerned about some activities in some of our parks downtown. And I know the police department is doing what they can with the legal constraints they have and stuff. Is the Parks Department approaching, have any approach to how to deal with homeless camps and things like that are near some of our parks and trails on the downtown section?
Well, certainly anytime you've got a large city, there are going to be pockets where there are concerns, and I really think that just hitting those head on to the extent that you can is probably your best course forward. Last year, when we had that conversation with City Council, we had a couple things going on, one of which was along the Midland Trail. There were definitely parts of the trail that really weren't feeling safe because they were being occupied essentially by folks that were doing things that weren't positive, and some criminal activity. I'm not going to sugarcoat it.
Sure.
City Council and Mayor Suthers agreed that it would be beneficial if we could have a real positive response to that. And we know that our Colorado Springs Police Department is pressured on lots of fronts and doesn't always have the capacity to respond to things like property crimes when you have a trailhead break-in or of a car or things like that. So we also know that they weren't necessarily getting the recruiting interest that they needed in order to fill the vacancies they had. So what was proposed really through a conversation with our city council was some ranger presence along these urban trail corridors to really activate, have a presence, be able to respond. And city council really agreed that that was a good idea. So we are going to be hiring 4 rangers to be patrol in two ranger groups in order to really beef up that presence. And what we always try to do with parks is activate them with positive things so that the negative things don't come in.
Sure.
That was part of the planning process for our historic parks as well. And any time that you've got a lot of people engaged in the positive activities, it tends to push out the negatives. So that was one. Another one I'm really proud of is we had some pretty bad things going on at Memorial Park at the corner where the skate park is, and including 2 fatalities. And Colorado Springs Police Department was working with us to try to identify what to do, and we were beefing up security patrols along that area, but with private resources. But Colorado Springs Police Department suddenly saw that there was a grant opportunity for increased safety, and Memorial Park's statistics and its data really proved up that that could be a successful application. And we teamed up between our grants person and the police departments, submitted a grant proposal for brighter lights for security gates that could close after park hours, and you sweep out all of the park goers and you don't have overnight activity. bad things tend to get reduced in the park. And then we also asked for security cameras. We were successful with that request, and now Memorial Park is going to get an infusion of $1.7 million of grant-funded improvements that are all focused on public safety. And I can't thank the police department enough for thinking about us, always keeping us as their partner, and really pursuing this to a good outcome.
Cool. Yeah, it's good that happens down there, because there were, like you said, some unfortunate incidents that happened there. With admittedly with a minor subset of our community that doesn't want to play nice with others, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it.
It's a whole different park goer at that time of night when those things are happening, for sure. Yeah.
Let's go back to the rangers you talked about. They're going to have some kind of enforcement capability, because right now your park rangers they're out there to educate people, but they don't have an actual enforcement capacity. And now we're going to change that a little bit.
Yeah, you think of some park rangers as those Ranger Rick folks that have a lot of knowledge and information and eyes on whatever the space is. And in the federal system, there is the capacity to enforce park rules with tickets and that sort of thing. In the city of Colorado Springs, up until these 4, we didn't really have that capacity. We would need to go out on dual patrols with commissioned police officers in order to write tickets. What we're looking at, and we're still developing this program, is working toward those full capacity law enforcement officers, but maybe taking a step forward now with some ticket capacity for various city code offenses.
I'm thinking like the state parks have their full commissioned rangers, and then they have their what they call Title 33 rangers that can enforce park regulations, but they can't necessarily make an arrest, but it's an enforcement capability. And I don't mean to downplay what the current rangers do, just them being out there and educating people and being a presence is a bit of an enforcement capacity. People see them out there and maybe I'm not going to do that stupid thing I was going to do that's going to get me in trouble.
Well, we've noticed a big change, and it was only about 5 years ago that we actually started with rangers. With the TOPS program in any large capacity, we had 2 rangers for 19 properties, and we beefed that up to 7. They were more along the lines of interpretation and education. But we did see a reduction in the kinds of negative behaviors in parks because we had people out there with eyes on the park, and they could respond to various things that were happening. This is the next step, which I'm hoping we can work toward a regulatory enforcement ranger, which is the kind of ranger that can write tickets for various violations of city code.
Right.
And then we'll keep working toward one of the recommendations from our park system master plan was to bring back a concept that we used to have in the police department, which was park police.
Right.
So some variation of that, we'll be working on really fleshing that out and making sure that when you're on the urban trails that you've got a team of rangers that can really either respond to something or go to a park and respond to something that's happening in a park and really provide all of those benefits.
Excellent. Well, that's great. I think people will be happy to hear that, we're taking steps to make some of our parks a little, when I say some of the parks a little safer, the parks that need it, most of the parks are very safe, I feel, and there's not an issue there. But, there's an element, like you said, that doesn't want to play nice with others. So this is going to help people feel a little safer in those places.
Absolutely.
Cool. Anything else that's going to be big for 2023?
Well, we sure have covered a lot of ground. I'm sure there are some things that I might be forgetting.
Well, no worries. If you think of something later, you can always come back on. We can talk some more.
Oh, I love the open invitation. Thank you.
It's always an open invitation. Well, Britt, with that, I think we'll say thank you for being here and taking time out of a very busy day to come and chat with me and talk about these things. People get an idea of what you've done and what's coming up, for this year. And there's always something coming up and things pop up during the year. But I'm glad that you were able to do that and really appreciate it.
Well, thanks so much.
All right, everybody, and thanks for listening to the Outdoors with Hiking Bob podcast. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Outdoors Hiking Bob podcast. I am your host, Hiking Bob Falcone, and you can find me on my website at hikingbob.com, which has links to my social media accounts, my columns at the what's it called now? 6035media.org. Used to be the Colorado Springs Independent. Also, all the other podcasts we've done, my photography website. Also, if you'd like to support this podcast, I encourage you to do that at Patreon, Patreon.com.